Are you applying for an E2 visa and wondering what sources of funds are allowed under the E2 regulations and just general rules? Well, in this video, I'm going to go through the various sources of funds that are permitted, from loans to gifts to inheritances to personal savings, etc. Basically, we're going to cover what the rules are regarding the sources of funds that you can use to invest in this E2 enterprise and obtain an E2 visa to run your company in the US. First and foremost, welcome back to the channel. I'm Attorney Adrian Pandev. I try to make it easier for everyone to understand the various visas and rules governing foreign investments in the US. In this video, we're going to specifically talk about the source of funds requirement and what is allowed for E2 visas. This video is part of a long series of videos I've been recording on the E2 visa, which is an investor visa that allows you to run your business in the US. Now, that being said, let's jump right into it and let's talk about the various funds and sources of funds that you can use to start your business in the US. Now, quick recap. Why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about this because the E2 visa is an investor visa, right? So in order to obtain an E2 visa, you have to show that you've made a substantial investment in a US enterprise, right? A US business. So in addition to that, right, making the investment, you have to show where that money came from, right? The government wants to make sure, the US government wants to know that you obtained those funds that you invested through legal means, right? Basically, put it very simply, the government does not want you to bring in illicit sourced funds into the US to fund your US enterprise, right? So they don't want proceeds from crime. So they make it a requirement that you prove that you have lawfully earned this money, right? So what are the common types of source of funds I see? And I get a lot of questions about this, especially from younger entrepreneurs who don't have, life savings that they have worked for their whole life. And are relying on gifts, inheritances, loans, etc. So I'm going to start with the easiest one that people don't have many questions about, just to kind of check it off, and that's personal savings, right? So this is sort of the easiest way to prove source of funds, and that's if you've been working, right, whether you have a business or you've been working as an employee somewhere, and you have regularly filed annual income tax returns, and you have savings, right, related to that job that you've had abroad. Well, the easiest way to prove that is just showing those savings, right? So you probably include, what we probably will show is bank accounts or brokerage accounts, and just showing that, hey, here are the savings, and we will include some sort of income tax return showing that you earned that money lawfully, right, that you pay taxes on that money. And basically, if you're showing that year over year you were making a certain amount of money, it's reasonable to conclude that your savings came from there, right? Now, there's a twist on this, and I see this a lot with especially entrepreneurs, where they don't have, they have businesses abroad rather than, a regular steady job. And in those cases, sometimes the latest income tax returns before applying for an E2 visa are not particularly strong, or in some cases, they're so strong that the client doesn't really want to show his income tax returns, which is understandable. So in those cases, often what I try to do is I try to link the source of funds to, the source of funds analysis to where actually the money came from. So what do I mean by that? Well, very often, right, people don't just have huge amounts of cash just sitting on a bank account. What will happen is they will liquidate some kind of position somewhere, right? Whether that's stocks, bonds, real estate, right? So what I do is I will show that transaction. Well, for example, a property was sold, like a real estate property, or certain stocks were sold, and I will show those transactions, and I will show the related capital gains taxes that in most countries, or many countries, the individual applicant had to pay, right? So this is a bit of a twist on the personal savings, where you're not really showing your income tax returns, but instead you're showing that the actual funds that you use to invest in your E2 business came from certain transactions or a transaction, and that you paid taxes on that transaction, and that transaction was lawful, right? That's a very common scenario I see too. Now, another one, and I get a lot of questions about this one, right, is gifts. Are gifts allowed? And the answer is yes. Gifts are, and I see this very, very frequently, especially with younger clients who get gifts from, relatives, especially parents. This is very common and it's fully allowed. You can obtain a gift. Generally, you want to include a gift letter. Just basically the person giving the gift signs this letter saying, look, this is a bona fide gift. It's given as a gift. I'm not looking for repayment. It's not a loan. And that, the individual recipient is allowed to use this gift to start their U.S. business. I see this all the time, to be honest. It's a huge percentage of my E2 cases use these gift letters. There's one caveat with these gift letters is that you need to show the source of funds. So you often have to show where the gift came from, right? Now, it depends. Like, I've seen various ways of adjudicating these, and basically the officers have a lot of discretion about how much documentation they ask for. In some cases, I've seen just some simple explanations or bank statements be sufficient. In other cases, the officers want to see, tax returns and again, proof of the lawful source of that gift with more specific detail. But generally speaking, you should be prepared if you're using a gift letter to show where the person, the grantor, right, given the gift, where they obtained these funds from. So it doesn't end just a single gift letter without an explanation why the person, giving you the money has this money will be insufficient, right? But it's very common, and I get a lot of questions, and people are worried about it, and they shouldn't be because it's allowed. It's specifically listed under the rules that it's allowed. Now, another kind of a spin-off on the gift question, right, is an inheritance. Are inheritances allowed? And the answer is absolutely yes. Depending on the situation, sometimes inheritances are much easier to prove because often, right, the money you're inheriting has already, it's been taxed, it's been, it's lawfully earned and run through the whole estate and inheritance system of whatever jurisdiction you're a citizen of. So especially if there's been anything like probate or any sort of proper inheritance procedure, it's very good documentation, and I find it very easy to document. And similarly, and this is kind of like a sad topic, but basically insurance proceeds related to someone passing away is something I see very often and related to the inheritance, money received from inheritances. All of it's allowed. You just have to document it again and again. You have to show, hey, where did this come from? Show that it's a proper, honest, lawful inheritance. In some cases, an officer could ask where the individual from whom you're inheriting earned the money, given that usually inheritances come with additional documents, and it shows that it's lawful and honest because it's gone through the particular probate system of that country. I don't see a lot of questions about the source of where these funds, basically where the individual earned these funds prior to giving you the inheritance, but it could come up, and usually a general explanation is good to include just to be able to explain it to the officer. But the bottom line is inheritances are definitely allowed. Now, here comes the main one that everyone always asks me about. What about loans, right? Can I get a loan to fund my E2 business? Now, here is where it gets tricky. So the answer is maybe. And it depends on exactly one thing, whether or not the loan is secured by the business. So what does that mean, right? So if you're getting a loan and the security interest, right, is the business itself, the E2 company. So to give a simple example here, right, basically what happens is it's a mortgage and you don't actually hold, like, say, there's a real estate component, right? And you're getting the bank or the financial institution, right, gives you the loan, but they actually put a lien on the business, on the actual, say, real estate, right? The property that the business is in. That will not work because you're using the business to secure the loan, right? So basically, the lender can take the business if you don't pay the loan. That will not work because you're not really, the way it looks, especially if it's an American lender, is that in essence, you're not really making an investment in the US. You're just using the investments made by the financial institution, and you don't really have the commitment because you can just leave and abandon the business. However, a loan secured personally by your own personal assets. So for example, you take out a second mortgage or a mortgage on a house, right, that you own, or a property, that's allowed. If you take out a loan on a stock portfolio you have, that's allowed. If your banker is willing to give you a personal loan because of the relationship you have with the bank, yeah, that is allowed. The key is that it not be secured. The security interest cannot be the business, right? So loans can work. However, you just have to be careful, right, that you're not taking that loan out based on a security interest in the E2 enterprise. Now, there's a spin-off here that a lot of people ask me about. What if I have other businesses, right? What if I take out this, the loan is secured in one of my businesses, but it's not the E2 company, it's not the E2 business. That is fine. There's no issues with that. The key is that the loan not be related to the E2 business. That's the easiest way to think about it. And those are the most common sources of funds that I see. I could, there's creative things that come up, but the bottom line is, right, as long as you're able to show that there's a lawful source and it doesn't come from activities, criminal activities or anything shady, to put it bluntly, in my experience, any RFEs, any questions regarding to source of funds can be overcome. You just need to document and explain where the money's coming from. If you have any questions, comments, please post them in the comment section below. Similarly, if you find the content helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed and liked the video. It really, really helps me, and I will do my best to record more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching.